立法會主席。
The President.
請各位繼續站。
Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. The Chief Executive. The Chief Executive's question time. Members who wish to ask questions, please press the Request to Speak button. Each member will be given 3 minutes to put questions to and receive replies from the Chief Executive, and the time for a member to put questions should not exceed 1.5 minutes. When reaching 3 minutes, the timer will ring as a reminder. In order to allow more members to put questions, the question time should be conducted in a short question, short answer format. Ms. Tanya Chen, President, Chief Executive. One country, two systems. You cannot protect. Hong Kong journalists covering news on the mainland, you cannot protect. And because of the collocation, we don't have a full full jurisdiction, and you can't even protect 2 trees. Now these are what's remained of the 2 trees at Bonham Road. I'm sure you expect this question from me. At a time when you were still the Secretary for Development, Carrie Lam, you said that on the June 16th of 2011, you said in your concluding remarks to my motion debate, you said that on considering a legislation for tree protection, my position is clear. I will restate my position. I will seriously consider starting study on the legislating on the issue. And I believe policy is all about keeping with the times. As an accountable official, I have to review the latest situation and respond proactively. From 2011 to 2018, many lives were lost. People were injured. People were killed. Don't forget about the Robinson Road case. So you say you have to consider the circumstances and do something. So when will you actually consider legislating, and how would you legislate? Now, this was your undertaking in 2011. When would you make good your promise? Chief Executive, I promise to actively consider the matter. After I left the post of Secretary for Development, I understand the Development Bureau has been actively following on the matter, and they now keep a prudent and open attitude towards legislating for trees, but they have been working. They have visited 6 cities on the mainland on how to manage trees, and then for New York, London, Melbourne, these cities don't have legislation on trees, but they are able to take care of trees properly. And then there are other places like Canada, Guangzhou, Singapore, they have tree legislation, so we will see what we need to do. Now, I would like to respond to what Ms. Tanya Chen said at the beginning. She said, I didn't protect this and that. Now, as the Chief Executive, my constitutional role is to ensure that one country, two systems are implemented fully and successfully in Hong Kong. It is also my duty to protect the public. Now, we say we want trees and people to live in harmony. When we cannot achieve both, then people's life must always come first. This is solid wood. Did you not hear? Please take your seat. Next, Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you, President. In the past decade, almost every year, there were serious incidents involving escalators leading to deaths and injuries. Now, so far we have about 65,000 escalators, according to record. Half of them are 20 years or older. Many of them don't meet the current safety requirements or standards. I understand the government has implemented a scheme to encourage owners to replace their lifts, but without financial resources or other incentives, many small owners are unable to afford that. So are you going to set up an independent $2 billion fund to subsidize the replacement of escalators or improvement of escalators by owners? Chief Executive. Now, the SAR government is fully aware of the concerns of the members and the public about safety of lifts. Since I became the Secretary for Development, yes, lift safety has always been a cause of concern. Now, we're seeing also the aging problems in Hong Kong, aging population, aging escalators, and so on. So I can tell Mr. Chen and other members that the SAR government is more than prepared to formulate a policy and make the financial commitment. It's like we have Operation Building Bright 1.0 and 2.0 for helping old buildings with repair and maintenance, and also we have a fund to help owners to deal with fire safety installation. So we will perhaps also do something about lift safety. Mr. Gary Chen. Well, the Chief Executive, as I understand, is implying there may be a fund, but that would not help the pressing issue here. I understand that there is a scoring system when you were the Secretary for Development on lift maintenance. Yes, there is a scoring system, but then it's not led to any improvement. From the information I have, there are 3 contractors with the most number of warnings by the government, but still they are managing about 500 lifts in Hong Kong. So how can you ensure lift safety? We have these poorly performing contractors. You do not issue summons to them, you do not prosecute them, and you do not revoke their licenses. So how can we rest assured? I will ask the Development Bureau and the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department to follow up on the concerns raised by Mr. Chen. I think there's a commentary today that says that an editorial to say that even if as we want to step up regulation and in maintenance, there is a shortage of manpower. So there is a shortage of lift workers, actually. Mr. Roy Kwong. Some days ago, when journalists covered a story in Beijing, he was violently treated by the public security officers. He was handcuffed and he was put into a car. But you did not condemn the incident. And now instead you said that the journalists must observe the law. So they were just covering news. What law did they break? And just now there's a statement saying the Journalists Association statement named you and other senior officials to say that you can't tell right from wrong. Do you think the Journalists Association's criticism of you is justified? Chief Executive. Well, Mr. Kong, as the Chief Executive, I expect to be criticized every day. Whether the criticism is right or no, or not, is a matter of opinion. I'm sure the public will form their own judgment. Now, in a short space of time, there were 2 Hong Kong journalists covering news on the mainland being insulted. I said that for our media workers conducting lawful news coverage on the mainland or overseas, their right to do news coverage should be respected, and definitely their personal safety should be protected. Now, after these 2 incidents, it so happened on both occasions I was on the mainland in Sichuan and Guangzhou, respectively. I immediately asked my colleagues to liaise with the Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office, and for the Sichuan case, I asked for immediate liaison with the Sichuan provincial government. For the Sichuan incident, you saw quick response from the local government, and apology was made to the journalist. I understand that there would be follow-up work to condemn those involved. For the Beijing incident, I said at the time that it's obvious that those were public security officers because they were wearing uniforms. So we're talking about a law enforcement agency carrying out their lawful duties, and that's when this happened. So that's why I said we have to find out more about the case. And soon after, the Public Security Bureau of Beijing issued some news. Now, I can say this, we need to respect each other, but when Hong Kong journalists cover news stories on the mainland lawfully, and if they encounter any problems, the SL government would be very much concerned. On these two incidents, we are following up on them, and we're also working with the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office to see how better we could improve communication or liaison to prevent such incidents from happening again. For the Beijing case, from the media, we could see... Oh, you don't want me to answer the question? But we've been slapped in the face, and you are the chief executive. You should air the grievances, address the grievances for us. I'm giving you another opportunity. Are you going to condemn the Beijing's public security officers? Please take your seat, Mr. Roy Kwong, Mr. Tommy Zhou. Now, point deduction system for taxi drivers was just suggested by a member of my party, because we don't want some bad apples in the taxi trade bringing humiliation to the entire trade. But unfortunately, for the point deduction system for taxi drivers, as soon as is suggested, there were strong views that included Mr. Frankie Yik. Because we see very often officials just count enough votes and that's it. But then the devil is in the details. So my question for you, Chief Executive, is this. There are several major problems involving taxis, tampering with the taxi meters, taking a detour, a refusal of hire, and overcharging. So 4 major problems. For these 4 major problems, would you can ask the relevant secretary to consider a point deduction system on these 4 kinds of problems, and also take the opportunity to deal with issues like taxi drivers saying they don't have change and they don't give passengers full change and so on. Chief Executive. Well, as you all know, taxi is an important mode of transport in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong is a tourist city, so the service standard of taxis will have a direct impact on how visitors see Hong Kong. And so we, at the same time, so we see an increasing number of complaints against the taxi service. Now, I can't give you a short answer, just a minute or two in response to your question, Mr. Zhang, but I can tell you that the Secretary for Transport and Housing will carefully consider the proposal and also consult the trade before launching the point deduction system. Well, you just need 2 to 3 seconds. Just say you support what I say and you work on the 4 problems and leave out the others. Because, this is more about details, and some of the details don't need to be included there. And even for the outdated details, they should be taken out as well, taking this opportunity. And I think that would be a positive change for the whole trade. Chief Executive, I agree. We can take a comprehensive view or review on the taxi trade issue. Professor Joseph Lee. Well, last week I met with a group of persons with disabilities, Chief Executive, and I didn't think they would bring up a point. Now, there's a thematic study number 62 that shows that there are only 2% of persons with disabilities in employment, but there are a total of 190,000 of them. And in the report, it said that 37% of them believe they could contribute to the economy. So that means so many of them want to work, but they don't get hired. And for those who are not actually working, they're put in the sheltered workshops. But at the sheltered workshops, they're only given training. So therefore, there is not an employer-employee relationship at sheltered workshop. They don't have the protection of statutory minimum wage. They don't actually receive a pay. They have no long service payment, and they don't have MPF contribution either. And instead, they're just giving incentive, and that's a small sum. And also because they're working at sheltered workshops as trainees, so there is no retirement age and there is no retirement benefits. Some of these are actually rather old. They have worked there for a long time, but they don't get any protection. Already, the working condition is not desirable. And at sheltered workshops, they're not considered employees. They're considered trainees, rather. So can you please consider a policy, say, let social enterprises to run the sheltered workshops so there will be a proper employment relationship and they will have proper employment protection. Thank you.
Chief Executive, Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your question. I'm very concerned about employment of PWDs. In 2000, when I served as the Director of Social Welfare, one of the earliest tasks that I undertook was to look at the sheltered workshop, whether this was the best service mode for the PWDs. I queried that, and I visited then the sheltered workshops run at that time still by the SWD, and I think the PWDs could not exploit their potential to the fullest, and they could not get contact with the society enough, and they didn't have the chance to acquire the skills needed. So, as you mentioned, we are working on two fronts in promoting employment for PWDs. One is supported employment, and the other one is social enterprises. So today, say at the Tammer, Ayek Bakery is a good example of social enterprises. So what is the position of the sheltered workshops? Recently, I've asked Dr. Lo Chi-Kwong to take a look at it again, because I would find it staggering that a few thousand people are waiting for sheltered workshop places. So thank you for raising this. I'll ask Dr. Lo Chi-Kwong to look at this seriously. Mr. Christopher Chang, Chief Executive. You mentioned about how Hong Kong should participate in Great Bay Area. Hong Kong can be an international financial center and the largest offshore renminbi center in terms of management of capital, financing, etc. Hong Kong can help promote the development of financial sector in Bay Area, and then we can raise the necessary funding for the Belt and Road Initiative as well. And I think this is right, and we support it. At the Bao-O Forum, and it is said that we would open up more to overseas capital. What is the definition of overseas capital? Does it include Hong Kong, Hong Kong's China-based, China-funded enterprises? Whereas Mr. Zhang knows, Hong Kong remains the largest offshore renminbi center and an international financial center. In last April, we launched the weighted voting rights listing system, which is a new system, and the local capital market has become more active. Now, but we set a higher goal, as mentioned by Mr. Zhang, and financial sector. We want to have national treatment as well, say for financial investors in Hong Kong, on the mainland, if they venture into Bay Area, can there be more opening up? Can thresholds be lowered and obstacles be removed? So this is what we're striving to do at the Bay Area, and that should be in line with the financial sector's demand. Chief Executive, financial sector is an integral part of the Bay Area. Now, what we are facing is the difficulty of having a high threshold. We can't get into that area. Will the Chief Executive reflect to the government our request to lower the threshold so that Hong Kong's securities firms can also serve in the Bay Area? Well, Chief Executive, this is definitely what we're going to do. This is one of our strategies for Hong Kong to take part in the Bay Area initiative. This is our goal as well. So we attach a lot of importance to the initiative. And after the Bay Area Development Plan has been launched, we would like to have a high-level steer and coordination. Now, we want to have a flow of capital, information, goods, and people, and that entails central government's policy support. So we will explore different channels to strive for better policies to be implemented for Hong Kong in terms of the development of the Bay Area. And Mr. Zhang, you can rest assured that this is definitely what we're going to do when we try to integrate into the Bay Area. Dr. Fernando Zhang, thank you. Chief Executive, well, the weather has been very hot. It's 30 degrees or so. A lot of elderly people, chronically ill patients are in a plight. Have you imagined how's the situation like for the elderly and the PW staying in residential care homes? Now, this photo shows the fates of many elderly people in Hong Kong. I don't know why you don't want to meet with me. I tried to make an appointment with you to talk about our residential care homes environment. You asked me to approach Lord Chi Kwong, and the Lord Chi Kwong said it very clearly. We have to strike a balance between the ideal and reality, and the reality is here. While tens of thousands of elderly people can't take care of themselves, they are trapped in this very appalling living condition. Now, if you go to an RCHE, you can smell the odor there. And as a chief executive, what is your vision for these people? I mean, is this the future fate of the elderly people? We refused to amend laws in the past two decades, and you are asking Dr. Lord Chi Kwong to give an answer, saying that how many people can have a living space of 16 square meters? Well, do you have the vision to change the situation, to improve the living conditions of these people? Chief Executive. Well, if Dr. Zhang would like to meet me, that's no problem. We can set up a time. But say on specific topics like this, I think a better approach, a more practical approach is to talk it over with the secretary first. Now, as to the question of elderly care, well, my concern starts not today, but a long time ago. You described the environment of the RCHEs. Or you might have a book of mine, and there were 7 to 8 articles about elderly people, especially about the long waiting time for RCHE, inadequate number of places, etc. We are still in a predicament, and that there aren't enough RCHEs in the relevant facilities. And sometimes the problems cannot be resolved by just having enough money. We lack the manpower, the land, and the facilities, etc. So the dilemma in front of us is we want to enhance the service quality, we want to provide for larger living space, but then we don't have enough places. So if we want to do the former, does it mean that the waiting time will be prolonged further? And are we trying to drive away these elderly people who are living in these appalling conditions as described by yourself? Now, Dr. Zhang, you spoke about your ideals. We can only talk about things that we can implement. Mr. Stephen Ho, Chief Executive. Dr. Fernando Zhang, your time's up. Please take your seat. Mr. Stephen Ho, Chief Executive, Hong Kong has 6,500 fishing vessels, and 3,000 of them are medium and small-sized vessels. And when the chief executive, when you want to go on board a vessel, how do you do it? You just step on the vessel on one foot. Well, imagine how they go on board their visiting vessels. They have to climb over the fences. They have to go over these stone sea walls and to get on board their vessels. How do you deal with the problem? I've approached the Marine Department, the AFCD, and the FCD. That is a birthing problem with the typhoon shelters is not their portfolio, and then Marine Department is not their responsibility. And then, well, it's the bridge which is built by the CDD. I've tried to approach the different departments, asking them to sit together and find a solution, but then there's still no solution. Can you consider putting in such berthing space or facilities like this? And I don't want fishermen telling me anymore that they are facing this problem. And for over but the past 3 decades, there has nobody has died because the fishermen have tried to leverage on the experience to minimize their risk. But well, they they didn't speak out. Does it mean that the SAR government will turn a blind eye? Well, please try not to allow the different departments to pass the buck around themselves. And that's a problem not confined to fishermen. I mean, that sort of predicament applies to other social problems as well. Chief Executive, we have a fine division of work in the government, and maybe the situation described by Mr. Ho is frustrating, and maybe sometimes it cannot be dealt with. Every time, actually, every day, I'm dealing with similar problems like this. And when I do this, they were criticizing me for senior official dealing with trivial matters. But I think I'm willing to do that because that can improve the livelihood of people. So I promise that I will take a personal look at the problem myself. We have worked very hard on marine safety. Don't say that we haven't done anything. If you can recall, 1.5 years ago, when I was the Chief Secretary for Administration, I launched this peer enhancement program, and the chairman of the Islands District Council, Mr. Chow Yong-tong, told me that for the Lama Island pier, which used to be a dangerous and dilapidated pier, there is a plan to enhance and upgrade it. And if your proposal is feasible, we'll really seriously look at it. Dr. Helena Wong. Your executive, have reflected to you that the Macau government arbitrarily refused entry of Hong Kong people into Macau. And in the recent past, including myself, district councillor, DP, members, journalists, academics, they want to go to Macau for business or for personal holiday. Well, they have been refused or denied entry into Macau. And I've heard you saying many times that in the Bay Area, 9+2, 9 cities in the PRD and 2 cities of Hong Kong, Macau, there will be economic integration, interaction, and there will be interflow of people and goods, etc. Now, the Hong Kong-Zhuhao Macau Bridge is soon to be commissioned. Say if Hong Kong people, including the councillors, if they travel by car to Macau, and then all of a sudden, Dr. Wong, you must return, then that would be a huge humiliation. So, Chief Executive, would you, on behalf of Hong Kong people, talk to Mr. Choi Sai-on, the Chief Executive of Macau SAR, to reflect this unreasonable treatment of Hong Kong people, protest for us, and try to ask them to review their immigration policy so that Hong Kong people's rights can be upheld. If they refuse to do that, would you consider Hong Kong implementing a retaliatory measure to refuse entry of Macau councillors, Macau journalists, and Macau Hong Kong people into Hong Kong? And also, is there a blacklist? Chief Executive. Number one, I must emphasize that every place has its own immigration policies formulated by that government. We must first respect the immigration policies of other jurisdictions. Well, sometimes we are also questioned by other jurisdictions on why we are refusing entry of certain people. So it falls under the jurisdiction of the relevant government themselves. Now, Dr. Wong referred to unreasonable denial of entry, where we express our country, but whether it's reasonable or not depends on the immigration policy of that particular place. Now, in any case, whether we have the Bay Area Initiative or not, we want to liaise more closely with the mainland and Macau, and there will be smoother flow of goods and people. And if you ask me to reflect our views to the Macau government, say if the legislators would just like to teach in Macau, then they should be allowed entry. They're not radicals. So you can rest assured that we're going to do that. So you are welcome to reflect your other views to the relevant government official. Mr. Michael Tien, Chief Executive. The Hong Kong XRL Hong Kong section, we spent $85.3 million. I think it's just an ancillary part of the whole project. And actually, the most crucial part of the railway is the section within mainland, and that is at Shenzhen North. We can connect ourselves to different cities. For example, in Changsha, Wuhan, the frequency of trains is 5 minutes from Shenzhen North. But I don't think that will be done. But we know recently that for the mainland sections, that will be a service charge which should not be subject to the monitoring of the legislature. I think that there is a problem. Now, Chief Executive, you have openly undertaken that you try to minimize the fight for the minimizing the service fee, but you may serve only one term, and there's no way we can monitor the situation. My logic is simple. Now, without our $100 billion payment for Hong Kong section, Hong Kong people will not travel on the mainland section. Will they just take the airplane because they can't go to Shenzhen North, and they will take the airplane. So for the mainland journey to be undertaken by Hong Kong people, it's all because we spent $85.3 million so that they can get the business. So there's no reason for them to charge us a service fee. Now, as an MPC delegate, I've written to the Standing Committee of the MPC asking them to talk to the China Railway, and I sincerely ask that the Chief Executive, that the China Railway authorize the MTRC to sell tickets on mainland journeys, and the service fee should be waived. In other words, Mr. Tian, you've spent already 2 minutes. Do you want a response from the Chief Executive or not? Chief Executive, please. Chief Executive, I don't want Mr. Tian has the impression that for this Hong Kong section of the XRL, well, no matter how important it is to us and to the national railway system, is not so important as mentioned by Mr. Michael Tin. Well, it's not the case that without this section, Hong Kong people will not take the high-speed rail on the mainland. But since this Hong Kong section is so important and it helps us integrate into the mainland economy, so we should do our best on this very good initiative. So no matter it's us and the MTRC, we will do our very best to try to minimize the service fee for purchasing tickets on the mainland journeys. But indeed, they have to do some administrative work, so it's unreasonable to call for it to be waived altogether. So I can undertake that it will strive towards that direction. The Chief Executive's question time ends here. After the Chief Executive has left the chamber, this Council will hold its regular meeting immediately. The Chief Executive will now leave the chamber. Members will please stand up.
That is the end of the Chief Executive's question and answer session.